Hello and welcome to the program. I am Suren. What time is it? Don't worry. Time is meant to be a mystery. Probably just a phenomenon, which we have no words to explain it properly. Are we perhaps slaves of time? Or are we using it for our own benefit? That's a question. Our current time constantly expands. It is like a ripple and is on a motion, as each condition of the experience creates the frequencies that move it further and further out into eternity. When we begin to discover our own space in life and know ourselves well enough, our reality becomes a part of the eternal continuum. Did you hear this saying before? Time does not exist. It's almost like the Matrix, where we dream in a hologram, which creates the effects of multi-dimensional reality. However, in consciousness, there is no sequence, and when we are in touch with our own true essence, because of our breaking through the time barrier, just think about it. All our lives exceed time and space concepts. This is not by any means a complaint, because by creation of the time element, they made it easier to organize their days and nights. They means the humans. In my autobiography in fantasy style, I spoke about my own childhood impressions from the times immemorial, where I found myself, like many others of us, in other dimensions, and the effect perceived in here and now is as close to being the reality to my mind. However, I realized that the past and current times are not really separated at all, at least to my mind. And it has always been just one line of energy, which I recall now. But we seem to discontinue using linear concepts when describing our own reality, whether correctly or incorrectly. Awareness extension is a process, and it can be considered like a stone, or perhaps just a heavy item falling down into the surface of water and releasing concentric wave circles around itself. Similarly, consciousness and perceptions expand and going wider and wider into amplified scenarios and dimensions. Yet, when this is taken into consideration as reality, we must experience in the physical lifetime, it loses its effect on human beings. Did you notice that? We are no longer in need to struggle with anything that is yet to come, not in here or in this moment. As we are fully involved with the concept of the now, yet we are in touch with ourselves, our own force of life, understanding that now continues like that ripple we have spoken of just before. And we have accepted this as our reality. We play various roles in various other garbs and bodies, within other dimensions. As we discover this, we also discover our consciousness. We are certainly not restricted or even imprisoned in one dimension or one form in one so-called time. We discover the time which still remains yet an illusion, but also an enigma. Our astral prison, in which neither time nor space is really seen as important, not even recognized, even our childhood traumas are stored in the emotional part of our past memories. When we find ourselves in the identical circumstances, no matter what the age group of the person now is, the reactions to this are always considered, but in a very exaggerated way. A child's emotional body, without being conscious, determines his or her behavior. This emotional part of every human being is, you guessed it, timeless, although not necessarily aware, with adult human condition under authority is clearly unnecessary. One sees oneself as a matter of consciousness. For instance, imagining myself like a little toddler, but being completely disturbed about the external authority, but is by nature a completely free being. When people are released from those childhood experiences, or severance under any authoritative conditions, discovering their own inner and outer independence, they tend to seize themselves as being children or as victims, but as being complete person, completely conscious of their own selves and their place in the world. That is also when they discover themselves being creative in essence and programming their own futures, and, of course, prevailing over time. We do not need to grow old and die due to old age-related diseases. There is no physiological necessity, and not even any reason for getting old. Obviously, our consciousness is not conceived, not even is manifested. It is letting the older cells die, and we need to have the new ones to be born, rejuvenating our bodies. Science is very knowledgeable of the situation and questioning why the DNA system is breaking down. Could the answer lie outside the body, but in the universal power, which provides the choice of reliving again? When we start discovering more about these spiritual issues and principles, we may have the answers, ushering definitely a new kind of consciousness. Obviously, we can consciously raise the frequency range of the body so that the body of light is established. Indeed, we can consciously become aware of our bodies, not because of the fear of death or only desiring to enforce our will upon the body, but because we can recreate our bodies according to the soul's plans. We can also maintain the body in a timeless fashion, and we decide to change the bodies if we want to, when we want to, and when we need to. And you may now ask me, how? Simply because it has been almost always available for the researcher. Spiritual traditions speak of such timeless bodies. There are many examples thereof. If you are familiar with yogis who may remain buried without any food or anything to drink for a whole day, and yet seem to have bodies that never die, and they can return back into their bodies once their spiritual tasks are over. This sort of people have certainly acquired the knowledge of practicing miraculous ways of survival, but they all are existing on extreme spiritual paths. You may need to have the courage to float through all these dimensions, discovering your aspects of reality which exist outside the time limits. Such release takes place, the memory of the cell, and they explode into current reality. This self moves according to the laws of the universal kind and into a new creation. Life is always on the move, advancing towards the higher goals, and does not search for a reflection of reality, but experiences states of consciousness in a way that transforms the human beings. This type of transformation can only emanate from the actual makeup of or structure of the cells. The participants oft gained habits released from reactive and limiting patterns of engraved programming in the cell. We have an emotional body which sets borders to our consciousness and carries on intensive actions. When we physically transmute prejudice and anger, and indeed store all that information in the cell structure, just like the light itself, we can witness invisible transformation which happens when we, humans, no longer are in need to face anger or even fear. Body does not need to scream for attention any longer. It has no need for any sicknesses. As it has been said before, time after time, a peaceful face is timeless. Happiness needs to be experienced without a fight for it. It cannot be achieved in a burst of force, but through natural ways, though not visible to the eye. We don't need to worry about anything at all because all can be achieved easily. Whatever we desire from life can be achieved, or we may need to observe that we may have had only grief before for a long time, whereas now we are able to receive love. We are able to be in contact with ourselves, truly, which has no time limit. We are aware of the feelings of the emotional bodies, and the reactions become completely dissolved through this awareness. Physical body, mental, emotional, and spiritual bodies begin to vibrate in harmony with one another, and this penetrates from the finest particle through the physiological, thought and cognitive processes even the astral and intuitive levels, up to the highest octaves of living. This way, the bodies start to merge together. The life force of these bodies are called the Shakti, and we are indirectly connected with the life energy within our own cells, our emotional and our spiritual being. And through these energies, we become revitalized. Consciousness has risen to a radiant level, and it is joyful as it does not judge or criticize or stand guard. This way, we truly begin to live and be alive. We don't need to be caught in the black net of time, wherein the emotional body is no longer functional, because it is severed from its divine higher self. Amazingly, recognize that when the server of the emotional body attempts to repeat itself at its lowest standpoint, even though we may all have had with our hologram experience, well, at least some of us do, we become unable to know what freedom really is in our lives, because what we remember as our experiences of denial and confusion. If negativity in our evolution of consciousness filters in and time stops, if we don't remember the inference of ourselves as a display, as the part of designers of our own, we may not have the factor of choice, and freedom remains a mystery. So we may be repeating the limitations with which we tend to identify at a level within us, where reality of ourselves sidestep, for it is a powerful, knowledgeable God being. The best of time cannot be real to keep on playing our emotional game sets, because it has no effect and is out. It is truly an illusion. We tend to live within the prison walls of our own choices, stopping the clock, whether that be at a transition from childhood to adulthood, or the experiences of other lifetimes. We simply adapt ourselves for reiterations or repeats in this time frame. To be free, that is to begin to evolve, we need to disconnect those imprints which consume and paralyze us, leaving not a single bit of energy left to extend our choices to new evolutionary experiences. Those old prints can indeed destroy our freedom of choice. Such a challenge may be unavoidable, as life originates through an accumulation of life choices from different lifetimes. These experiences dictate our eventual real life conditions, and realities show the period of existence was determined by conditioning self-consciousness, concerned probably with a freedom of personal self-knowledge. Now, pathways we have chosen by our own judgment can always be that which brings us the highest evolvement for our soul. This is in fact the reason for incarnation. One word popularly thought was that it is why people choose bodies and occupy themselves within the limited dimension of life. This is a very significant understanding, but for all people living in the now during this time on planet Earth, we are being reminded of our early childhood days. We may have been pushed aside by friends or sometimes family members when they were disturbed by our obstinance in fulfilling things. They may have considered it unimportant or uninteresting. Believe me, I have experienced this during my childhood days. I had to understand why it was so important to me within my current incarnation, especially when I was younger, although I was considered as a very rebellious child and would not follow. I could see parallels now between the time and my current self. When I have been made aware of my past existence before times, which I will be telling you much later, when the time is appropriate to remain according to my own choices, meant that I would be sometimes rejected. And so I needed to develop some courage to stand alone. And I still do so, even in my very mature age. And I know there have been many others of the similar situation, with a memory of the past, who had a very difficult days, and they are often wrongly interpreted and understood, judged negatively and disturbingly. Indeed, one's only reality and the roles one played in life took on yet another standpoint with another quality. However, it is always our choice to be a creator or victim, if we like so. Once again, the old question creeps up. Who am I in this existence? We challenge a dilemma facing by all people living at this particular time on Earth. Perhaps we can consider that there are certain classes of people who are unaware and living on Earth, which the general public find it hard to accept. We may have somehow established a contact with our spiritual bodies, just enough to understand the purpose of our existence. The reality is, just as it seems that we have passed through millenniums in various forms of existence, and often accepting that we were not free to develop to our own freedom, believing that we were only born to fight through life and finally die with no alternative and no choice. But our consciousness has broadened and opened up, and we now inquire about the reason and the purpose of our living here in this time on planet Earth. We don't need to struggle with life's necessities any longer. Even our finances may be comfortable. We may be reasonably successful, and we may have a loving family. Alas, some of us have none of these. Or the freedom of having a loving family may have been denied to us. I don't think that it was our choice. Despite all that, we tend to think about why we are here. What is our duty or reason and role in life? What shall they really begin to do in their lives, would you say? What experiences might be most rewarding? Is it important to find who they really are and how they can manifest this in their own lives? But if you notice, people usually run into several barriers in their research. Many have even problems in their personal relationships. Their children, their superiors, spouses, parents. We have normally formed a dependency on outside sources of power, perhaps even an alliance that we would not choose to break, lest we be faced with the truth, absolute reality, from which we are hiding, perhaps. Perhaps even our covert mistrust of our own power. Emotional body must certainly permeate through all our body consciousness, with a warning to keep on holding at all costs. There is now habitual interpreting new data, closes down most of the avenues of motion, meaning choice. And guess what? Time stands still, probably even deprived of new possibilities. The body self switches to automatic pilot mode, and this creates an inevitable numbness in what was once a whole being. And this in turn creates specific situation towards life. There's a vitality so that no matter how small the energy radiates outward to embrace life, no matter how weak the position is, there is no residue from which to create anything. And this predisposes us to the standpoint of a victim. This predisposition has to the point where is literally a posture, a flinching that reflects itself in all the subtle bodies, and its consciousness limits itself to the fight or flight syndrome, fear, anxiety. The victim never lives in the now, but always in the dread of future and the shadow of the past. Energy that provides the shell of premium ability and immunity to external negativity, the victim is the designer of his own self-held prophecies. This leads to victimization, and it is not an energetic way as we are told from our childhood days. It is in fact observed as being primordial response, echoing out for the multidimensional experiences. And those who choose the victim role often have a theme of self-judgment relating to misuse of power and self-hatred originating from some unconscious and unshakable issue. That we can take as a tribute to the law of mechanism, that we are able to get some other being to perpetuate the unspeakable upon us, and us maintaining that years of threat of innocence, simply because the feeling is coming to us rather than from us. Think about it. That play of denying power usually begins by choosing parents who will strive to keep us powerless. This or these stifling relationships must be understood as a reflection, coming back to us as externalized power, serving as a prototype, a form of influence or control that overwhelms us. Such control is created by that authority, which is to define who we are, how we should see ourselves, and how we should develop. This is readily observable in parent-child relationships of today. But parents need not be only parents as we know of. Parents certain judgments upon their children, and children making decisions based upon these impressions. In this gameplay, the children have chosen their parents, using them like pawns on a chessboard. The children then choose their parents to reflect the subjects and issues to which they are most resistant or reactive. What is the purpose of this position, you might ask? But that is to balance cause and any effect on karmic level, so that we hopefully learn to take responsibility for our own selves. If the children have domineering parents, constantly critical or even physically aggressive, and believe me, I have experienced that within my own family, my ex-wife and children, under the dictates of a cult she had adhered to. The young one may never receive encouragement, but instead invalidation. For example, you are too dumb, you cannot make it, you will not achieve anything, you will be just like your stupid dad. As stupid as he is. From the child's spiritual level, this can only be his or her own free choice, designed to give him or her the necessary push towards the best possible development. In this case, the child will grow to turn against that other parent, or otherwise, for the rest of their lives without realizing it. Obviously, he or she so imagines the knowledge and abilities needed to learn within this particular incarnation on earth. There is something called karmic bonding and connection between beings, that the child will attract those souls with whom he or she is being together before on deeper levels. Roles are often interchanged as the individuals take turns becoming a father, mother, and the child continues to happen. The souls are in mutually agreement to incarnate in synchronicity, helping each other gain the experience appropriate for the development. Therefore, young ones are never a victim of the parents. The parents, on the other hand, had chosen each other, believe it or not. Those parents usually play the principal roles in the child's life, which he or she himself or herself continues to direct. Within the biographies of famous people, regardless of time and culture, those who achieved eminence had severe childhood circumstances. Here comes a very important question, and that is this. What makes us able to leave our mark on the world What indeed makes one into Buddha, Jesus, or an Einstein, or even Prophet Muhammad? We all know the adversity often helps forge what we are or will become, as it triggers the energies of power we already have. There may be restrictions and limitations because of the negative powers. We are always challenged to wake up and focus our attention to this dimension on Earth. Consciousness and connection without higher self can provide us only with a magnificent new tool for perceiving our lives. Lessons from the vantage point of the hologram, a part of and making choices that integrate our experiences on the level of creation. This framework and the synchronicity with the development of life. People emerge from hard-earned lessons with very special talents and capabilities, and with their own consciousness raised. These souls are forged in such a way that they can only radiate special energy in the world. Out of the position of the victim who may assert powerlessness is formed a greater power, the journey of the soul. And it forces them to become aware of a special quality of their being and to manifest it, radiating out into the world when they are shining as artists, scientists, composers, or great thinkers through the love in their hearts or something more different. They truly break away from conventional, invisible lives. We humans have certainly developed the social system in which the masses worked like sheep. We encourage a yearning to be accepted and beloved, and we desire to fit in with others as a means of processing and exercising power and control. And such mechanisms have been the major incarnational challenges on Earth. For every government, every outside authority, and in fact, every religion is eager to control people. Up till now, we have not had any developmental model that is not based on either power or the opposite. We live in a system that calls for victims. However, the most profound lesson is in here that regardless of how they are victimized in this life, whether under brutal people, parents, cousins, or anybody, relationship problems, or whatever else, the victims always ask, why am I with these people? This makes me wonder why I had experiences where it made me ask the same. More shockingly, however, is their realization that they victimize us in this life are often as whole group with whom they have traveled many lifetimes before. Karma means merely balance and choice of experiences. Flow of energy originates and flowing of personal and cosmic level which move the universe and the universes beyond. I suppose it needs many other souls to enter into this dimension as role players in action. Such will refuse to go alone, having perhaps already learned such lessons, and not wanting to hinder their own development. they will probably not desire to disharmonious souls offer this gift. Namely, your enemy will surely not do this to you. Those who really love the soul will consider giving such a gift. As they enter a new victim scenario, it is with a full realization that the bonds between them will become tighter. Such interaction will lead to an almost inseparable relationship, lasting many lifetimes. Presently, many such victims realize the power and control they wield, and the suffering they caused in earlier lifetimes. May see the situation from a new and higher standpoint. And so, they may become transformed once they realize the deep love on the spiritual level between those beings accompanying them in this dance. This can only be freedom. They are not damaged. And enhance the responsibility for the choice. These magnetic messages, right victimization, simply dissolves or disallows, indeed, creative, positive responses to life and all the adventures that go with it. It is possible to cast off the victim role in this life and become a creator instead of originating a new victim role. When it is realized that he or she has already exercised power, demonstrating special talents and capabilities, and enduring self-trust is required. This new self releases the old impressions of guilt and prejudice, only our incomprehensive even being bring them into action. Our new recognitions will release such thoughts. We need to orient ourselves for much final energy frequency of real creative power once our resignation is harmonious with a new reality. We become creators, and we are transformed for good. We don't need to force our thinking into a new pattern or tell ourselves that since we now know the truth, we will do such and such with our lives. This is a transformation that occurs naturally. The students release out themselves from the residue of such experiences. We tend to return to that essence we were before. Remember, all is energy. The entire universe is made of the same material, as well as the emotional residue which can hinder us as well as the energy formations. This way, the body becomes more open, more receptive, and the limitations are put aside along with self-denial and deprivation, instead absorbing creative strength. This is when we radiate this pure creative energy in multiple forms. This is the process of transformation from being a pitiful, helpless victim to a radiant, creative being. The soul prefers itself to be a creator and creative. Now we shall pause and we'll meet by the next episode. Until then, keep smiling and be happy. Thank you.